I realized that I was living a lot of my life for the people around me and not for myself. And that left me overweight, depressed, extremely anxious, and just generally unhappy.
How did you actually navigate the societal pressure of being labeled a divorced woman?
Sacrificing myself in order to fit someone else's standard.
Welcome to In the Making, the podcast where we dive deep into personal journeys that are shaping our world today. This isn't just about success stories, but the real, raw, and sometimes controversial paths people walk to become who they are meant to be. Today's episode is one you don't want to miss. We'll explore divorce, healing, mental health, and the societal bias that keeps us from living our fullest lives. Our guest Cass has lived through it all and turned those experiences into powerful lessons. Let's jump right in. Cass, welcome to the show. I'm so excited that you are here with us today.
I'm so excited to do this. It's such a great opportunity, and vocalizing people's stories is how we come together and how we learn more about ourselves and feel more connected and less alone. So I'm excited to share, and hopefully it resonates with somebody.
I've known you for a couple of months through a common women group, and I've seen you doing such wonderful work. And a lot of times, when a woman is very powerful, very informative, I feel from my heart she has gone through a lot because that resilience shines through you. We spoke a little bit about certain topics that we want to talk today. I'm going to jump right in. It is personal, and thank you for sharing because divorce is such a taboo in many, many societies and circles. How did you actually navigate the societal pressure of being labeled a divorced woman? And I'm surprised that even I'm asking you this question in 2024. And what personal biases did you have to unlearn about yourself during that time?
Yeah, so I think this is the biggest thing is there is such a stigma, especially I live in the South, right? So the Southern US is very heteronormative family, nuclear unit, like parents need both, or kids need both parents, which I think is still very true in some cases. I realized that I was living a lot of my life for the people around me and not for myself. And that left me overweight, depressed, extremely anxious, and just generally unhappy. And, found myself sitting with information that, it really hit me on the head when my therapist asked me if your daughter was in a relationship like your marriage, would it be okay for you? Or what advice would you give her? And I was like, I would tell her to leave. And she was like, why is it okay for you, but not okay for her?
Yeah.
And that to me was societal pressure had to go out the window at that point because it just didn't really occur to me how much I sacrificing myself in order to fit someone else's standard.
Right.
And the reality is that families come in all shapes, sizes, colors, multiple parents in the house, one parent in the house, no parents in the house, grandparents, and that has been a legacy for a lot of generations. We just don't amplify it in the same way. So I decided to choose me.
I love that. There's so much stigma around the fact that you're going to be judged. There's so much questioning around why, what, how. And we need to stop and pause that for a minute and remember that this is a person we are talking about. Unless that person is okay discussing and talking openly about what has happened in her or his life, we need to just move on with what we have right now. In a world that glorifies hustle culture, moving on. Do you think we'd really allow space for healing, especially after something as life altering as divorce?
I think that the people who come out on the other side the most healthy are the ones who take the space to take stock and heal.
Yeah,
I love the quote, you're not doing the healing so that you can live with the trauma and the anxiety. You're used to that. You're doing the healing so that you can live with the joy and the fun and the fulfillment of your life. And that to me is so powerful. It's so important to realize that healing isn't going to be a one and done situation. You're always going to have to unravel and unpack and then rebuild. I think about how things were when I first separated and then divorced versus how things are. And don't get me wrong, like every dual parent, or I call it parallel parenting situation, is different. But I'd say I have gotten better at doing my work to parent parallel to him in a way that is healthy for our kid.
Yeah, this is wonderful. You're doing the best you can for yourself and for your daughter. You're successful, you're, shining in the way you should. There's a huge learning for a lot of us over here. Is not to have that step back, considering like you got divorced or you got separated. The learning is how do you become the best version of yourself when something like this happens with you. Let's also talk a little more about mental health. While there is so much awareness about mental health, I still feel we don't talk enough about it. I'm still honestly really scared to openly talk about my mental health. People in India judge you like, what is wrong with you? You look all shiny and bright and fine. You were raised by the best parents. So there is so much stigma, and I've become more progressive and mature. I'm ready to even, take that leap of faith and ask you these questions. How do you think our society still gets mental health wrong, especially within families?
Yeah. So I think we're in a generational shift, right? Those of us who are in that millennial, like Gen X
Yes.
age groups, we are realizing not all of us have children, but those of us who are around children, or you look at how you want them to be and the skills that they're going to need to grow up in the world. For so many of us, we weren't given those tools, like how to name our feelings, what emotion feels like in your body. And the reality is those emotions are going to happen whether or not you recognize them, whether or not you name them or not, right?
True.
It just is. And so ignoring it and pushing it down and pretending like these aren't issues or challenges, or that they don't impact or affect you, is doing you a disservice. And now we're at the ages where we see those things showing up in our body, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the bravest of us say, I don't have to be this way. I don't have to feel this way. And recognizing that there's a lot of work that comes into that. And it's scary, right? I started going to therapy in college initially, and then I've been going on and off for almost 2 decades at this point. And I go back every once in a while just to kind of check in, but I see it more as like going to the gym, right? We're going to go on a walk. We're going to maybe run. We're going to lift some weights. We do that in order to maintain our health and maintain our muscle. And your brain is a muscle, and you have to go at different times. Now, sometimes maybe you're going to train for a marathon, meaning you're inside of a crisis and you need some more stability. And so then you go to your therapist maybe a little bit more intensely. But then sometimes you just need to go for maintenance. You just need to go to check in. And I'm showing up in the best way that I can. There's so much value in being able to say, I don't know how to process this information, and the tools that I was given are no longer helpful for me. And so I'm going to seek resources and expertise from someone who knows more than me. Like
Yeah.
that, we do that in our jobs every day. Why can't we do that for our own mental health? You live inside your brain, so let's make it something that we are glad to be inside of.
Yeah. And I heard this quote, you cannot pour from an empty cup. Loving someone through their struggle means making sure you're standing strong too. Because you're
Yeah.
fighting that fight while
Yeah.
supporting them or supporting yourself.
And gender is such a huge part of that, right? Because we as women are culturally taught within patriarchy, we're taught that we're supposed to empty ourselves out and just be there for everybody else. But like you said, you can't pour from an empty cup. You shouldn't be pouring from a cup that only has like a quarter inch, or like you should ultimately be fulfilling yourself. And that goes back to what we were talking about with my divorce. Like, I wasn't getting fulfilled, and I
Yeah.
wasn't able to be the best version of myself in that relationship. And if that means I have to renegotiate the relationships in my life and set healthier boundaries and say, you know what, that's no longer for me.
Yes.
Saying no is a full sentence, but saying no also allows you to say yes to other things.
You Podcasts do write a lot, extensively about eliminating bias within institutional structures. But how often do you feel institutions genuinely want to change versus ticking a diversity checkbox?
Honestly, institutions don't want to change. By their nature, they're going to want to stay the same because they want to maintain themselves.
Yeah,
However, institution is meant to serve the people that uphold it. And so if the policies or the structures that make the institution are no longer adhering to the needs of the people who are within them, then it has to change in order to maintain the participation of that group. So I'll give the example of a university. Over time, universities change what academic policies they hold on to, who they admit. Maybe they expand different parts of their research structure. They do that in order to be able to maintain themselves, because if they don't, then they will no longer be functioning. And so the challenge is encouraging people to realize that the institutions are there to serve them, not them there to serve the institution. And as we as people change, then so too should our institutions. I'm reminded of when I did my undergraduate and was presenting my undergrad thesis. I'm like a 20 something, right? And I'm out here, I'm gonna go change the world and stuff. I wrote my thesis about the role of women in Black nationalism and how that is something that is so overlooked. Someone asked me the question of, how do I see myself going into these institutions and saying, you need to change yourself. And how am I going to bump up against that history of exclusion of Black women from the narrative? And I said, well, obviously, I am in that community already, and expecting that community reflect me is not an unrealistic expectation. It's more unrealistic that I be erased.
yeah.
And that has really driven me in my career. It's more realistic that we be, or unrealistic. It's more unrealistic that we be erased from the narrative rather than asking us to be included in it, because we already exist.
So true. Wow, that is very inspirational. It requires a lot of courage to do what you're doing, especially writing. Writing has its own power, but to bring that power to life requires, a lot of commitment. So, what do you say to people who argue that cancel culture is going too far in attempts to hold institutions accountable for bias?
Unpopular hot take: cancel culture doesn't exist. I think that what we're looking at is accountability culture.
Yeah,
People are accountable for what they say and how they behave and what they act. I can't go around and just write whatever I want, however I want, not expect anybody to react or have some
yeah,
sort of thought process around that. I mean, ultimately, good writing is going to trigger some response,
it
but
will.
I am accountable for what I say and how I write and how I communicate. And to think that I should not be accountable is, at the very least, disrespectful, but at the most, a little violent, right?
Yeah, it
And
is.
so I don't think cancel culture exists, because if you look at anybody who's been quote unquote canceled,
Yeah,
they end up coming back on some level,
yeah,
right? I mean, well, it remains to be seen. There's some in the news right now that we'll see how that pans out. But at the end of the day, are they being canceled, or are they being held to the standard in which that our culture is expecting?
I agree.
I don't I don't think that we're really eliminating people's ability to exist. We're calling them to account and calling them, as the old folks say, calling them to the carpet and asking them to be held to the standard of equity, the standard of fairness, of
Yeah,
justice. And that to me can't be a bad thing.
I agree. I think the call for diversity and inclusion is louder than ever. But we have to ask ourselves, is it for show, or there's like a real change happening? Because I remember speaking with a woman who was part of the corporate diversity initiative, and she said the committee meetings felt more like PR moves than the genuine offers to dismantle bias. It's one thing to say you want change, but another to actually commit to hard work that comes with it. So I feel true diversity isn't about the optics, it's about overhauling the systems that have held people back for so long.
Yeah, agreed. 100%. And I think we have to recognize, as practitioners, there are going to be organizations who just want to check a box. And it's very unfortunate. There's a lot of people who will go into uh, creating change in their organizations and dismantling bias with a lot of fervor and a lot of excitement. And then when they start doing the work and they get really uncomfortable and they're again held accountable, they will pull back from that. Not because they don't have the desire to, but because it requires you to sit in some uncomfortable truths and maybe even a little bit of guilt and shame about the decisions that you've made and how you've impacted people. So I would say a lot of people can really create
Yeah.
change that is long lasting.
Mm-hmm. Um, Cass, your side hustle is called Know Better, Do Better. I love it.
Mhm.
But what happens when people know better and still choose not to do better? Is it willful ignorance, or do you think there's something way more deeper?
Yeah, I think it's a both and situation. I think sometimes you're presented with new information and you just want to hold on to the old information again because it's more comfortable. You don't want to do the hard work, right? The benefit of the work that I do through Know Better, Do Better is I do get to be bespoke in who I work with and who I choose. And you really do have to come to me like you want to do some like deep diving stuff. I'm going to ask you hard questions
Yeah.
and hold you accountable. And that's a start. And then
Hmm.
you just, I think my role is more to plant the seed,
Yeah.
help you solidify where you want to go with your leadership or within your organization, plot out those steps, and then it's your work, right, to do the rest and to make it and put it into fruition.
True.
Um,
In your journey of educating others, where have you seen the most resistance to change? And what's been your most controversial experience of calling out harmful behavior?
yeah, honestly, I see it mostly in my personal life. That's where I get the most resistance. The one to like I'm closest to and who I do life with on a regular basis, they just know that about me and they'll call me out too. We have a great combination. Is I'm not going to say it's easy to be in my inner circle because I do like, oh my God, did you read this article about, you know, this thing? Whatever. Anyway. So professionally, it is a generational thing. Folks that are in that Gen X, they were taught to be a certain way and to show up at work a certain way. And it is very difficult for them to change that and to see themselves empowered in being a positive conduit for policy change in their organizations. Um, a lot of them don't have leadership development.
Yeah,
It was not a thing. And so now you're leading teams, you're that senior director, vice president level, and it's rough.
it is.
So I would say this is where the mental health and understanding your own boundaries comes in. People who don't have healthy work life boundaries, a good rhythm to their work life, it is harder for them to make change because they're so in the weeds with their day to day life. It's hard for them to be creative and they're just so weighted down by the lack of boundaries. And so
Yes.
they don't have the imagination to
No, they,
pull through
yeah,
to try to do something else. That's where I get the most resistance. And I tend to think about how can I navigate around that resistance rather than trying to change them because it's not my job to change you. My job is to look at the policies and the
yeah.
procedures that are contributing to your own lack of boundaries.
You're balancing being a writer, content creator, entrepreneur. How can women stop glorifying doing it all and celebrating saying no more than often? Because it takes a lot of effort and work to say that you have a work life balance, but there are days, there are times when you cannot be everywhere in life.
Yeah. So I've got a couple of hacks. One of them we talked about is saying no
Yeah,
because saying no frees you up to other things and it takes practice. Saying no and it might be to people who are closest to you and hopefully they care about you and love you enough to be able to respect that. I had a friend just invite me to go to a show and it's not until around Christmas time. But I know that time is so busy and I don't want to add anything at this point in order to protect my stress
yeah,
later. So I'm gonna have to bow out. I'm not gonna go. Number two is understanding you're never going to life as much as you work. So rather than having a balance like a scale, think of it more of like a rhythm, right? So I work Monday through Friday and I have a writer's job, but sometimes I do my writing over the weekend or I just put it in a voice memo. It's finding the little niches in time where I can have rhythm to my life rather than like searching for balance, right? My last hack is get a hobby. Get something that you do outside of work, and it doesn't have to be something you're great at. You don't have to be good at your hobbies.
Yeah.
Find something fun that is not work, that's not in that hustle culture over productivity kind of situation.
So well said. Thank you, Cass. That was a lot of tips and inspirational guides. You can write a guideline about whatever you said. We're coming towards the end of the show, and it was so amazing to chat with. This is one of my favorite times where I ask you some rapid fire questions.
Yeah, let's do it.
What's one piece of advice you'd give to someone going through a tough divorce right now?
Sure. I would say get a good lawyer, but also make sure you're gentle to yourself and let the lawyer be the bad guy.
Love that. In a word, how would you describe your journey as both a writer and a healer?
Ever evolving. That's a hyphenated word. That counts, right?
Love it. What's your go to self care ritual when everything feels overwhelming?
I make a cup of tea and I paint.
So, is it tea or coffee?
Coffee if it's daytime, but tea usually in the afternoon, nighttime.
I love that. Thank you so much for joining us today, Cass, on In the Making. These are the conversations we need to have about healing, resilience, and the truth behind the label society places on us. If today's episode resonated with you, take these lessons into your life and remember, you hold the pen to write your own story. Until next time, keep evolving and keep making your mark on the world. And don't forget to subscribe